Today I'd like to talk about chapter 18 of the book of Genesis, and it kind of continues the story of Abraham and what happens with him in his life. Uh, and chapter 18 opens with it's a warm day, and Abraham is by his tent and kind of relaxing. He's hanging out by his tent. And he looks out and he notices three men that are approaching. And so he goes out to the three men and he says, "Gee, can I help you with anything? Can I get you a meal? I'd like to offer you some hospitality here. I'd like to bring you some water for your feet. You've obviously been on a journey. It's a warm day." At first, they seem kind of reluctant to accept his hospitality, but then they say, "Well, do as you wish." So, of course, Abraham runs into his tent, talks to Sarah, says, "Sarah, we've got some visitors here. Can you whip up some bread and bake something for them?" And Abraham goes to his flock and gets one of his best lambs, and he cooks up a wonderful meal for the visitors, and he brings it out to them, and they're enjoying this meal. And then one of the visitors is talking with Abraham, and he says, "When I come back to this way next year, your wife is going to deliver you a son." And Sarah is kind of close by there in the tent, and she's preparing some dishes, and she overhears that, and she's like, "You got to be kidding! I'm in menopause. I'm not having my period anymore. I'm old, and Abraham is older. We're not going to have any children. I mean, that's not going to happen." And she's already been through the incident with Hagar and Ishmael, and so she's like done with this idea of having a child. So the visitors enjoy their meal and everything, and then Sarah and then Abraham get into a little dialogue with God about what was happening. And God reaffirms what the visitor had said to Sarah and says, "Sarah, this time next year you are going to have a son." And then God takes it a little bit further and says to Sarah, "Now, Sarah, why did you laugh at that?" And Sarah tries to get out of it. She doesn't want to kind of get caught with God. He says, "Oh, no, no, God, I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh." And immediately God says, "Yes, you did." So she's kind of caught in her lie as well. So Abraham kind of continues with the hospitality, with what he's doing. And so he walks the men towards their destination, and they're heading towards Sodom. And so they're on their way there, and they're going there, and Abraham kind of says goodbye to them. And then God is kind of thinking about this, and he says, "Should I have this discussion with Abraham about what I'm going to do to Sodom, because there are things happening in Sodom that I don't like?" So comes to Abraham, and they have this kind of dialogue together, and Abraham kind of knows that God is up to something here with regard to Sodom. So says, you know, "God, would you spare Sodom if there are 50 men in Sodom who are innocent, who are good men? Would you spare it?" God says, "Well, 50, yeah, I think I would. I would spare it." And then Abraham gets into this negotiation. He goes from 50 to 45 to 40 to 30 to 20 and finally down to 10. And each time he's having this dialogue with God, he gets, a little bit more like, "God, please don't get upset with me, but what about and they go back and forth. So these stories in chapter 18 are very interesting because they bring out some points about our relationship with God. And the first thing we see is brought out is the importance of hospitality. And in the Near Eastern tradition, this was extremely important because people would be traveling a lot. It was a nomadic society where people would come and they would do these journeys to different places. And a lot of times there wasn't you know, restaurants and hotels to stay at, and places where they could get food and rest, and sometimes even getting water was a problem where there would be a well. So it was difficult to travel in those days, and people understood that because they would have to travel themselves. So this idea of hospitality was very important. So Abraham demonstrates that, and it's a great kind of lesson for us in terms of offering that gift of hospitality to others, making them feel welcome, particularly the stranger, the foreigner, somebody who isn't at home in your area. And so many times we see that today when people travel, they'll travel to another city and they say, oh, the people are wonderful there, or they say the people are terrible. And this idea of hospitality is so important for us to display towards other people. And we also see in these stories in chapter 18, we see Sarah's reaction. And you can understand, of course, why she would react that way, because, I mean, this is something that is so unusual. She's at menopause, going to have a child. It couldn't happen. So you can see her laughter and her reaction. And the idea is, can we trust in something unusual that God will do for us? Our God is very loving. Our God is very kind. Our God is very generous. Sometimes we tend to forget that, how wonderful God is, how wonderful God can be. And so Sarah, she kind of finds it difficult to believe that, to trust in God that much. As Abraham did earlier, we saw he had that same reaction of laughter as well. So as people get older, they're thinking, not going to have any children, or in some other instances, we might think, God's promise isn't going to come true for me, or it's not going to work out. But yet, having the patience to see the way that God will lead us is so important. And also, very interestingly, Sarah tries to lie to cover up that I didn't laugh, God. And then the impossibility, of course, of lying to God. God knows the truth. So when we lie, we think we sometimes get away with it, but of course, we never get away with a lie. God always knows the truth. Another aspect we see here in chapter 18, we see this idea of negotiating with God. And how Abraham starts out with 50, gets it down to 10, goes back and forth. And so many times that's us, right? We try to negotiate with God, say, God, I'll do this if you do this favor for me, or somebody is sick, can I do this? And we go back and forth with God. We sort of have a negotiation with God, and it's kind of a typical part of our prayer life. We try to ask God for certain things and make God certain promises, vows to God. Um, and we see here the importance of listening, and how our God is a listening God. I think what the story is trying to bring out is God cares for us. God will listen to us, and God will help us. God will be there for us. And part of prayer is not only us listening to God, but the realization that God is listening to what's in our heart as well. So Father Abraham, our good leader here, the first one to say yes to God. Father Abraham has many friends has Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Keep on praising the Lord.